Hello, and welcome to the Gamer Librarian Podcast. I am your host, Adrian, and I will be talking about my experience with the Street Fighter 6 demo, Mutants Masterminds 3rd Edition, I Am Legend by Richard Matheson, and more. Afterwards, be sure to subscribe to be notified when future episodes are released, and show your support by liking and leaving a comment. Thank you for joining. A few days ago, Street Fighter 6 recently just dropped its first demo for the public to try out, and this demo encompasses a snippet of character creation and like the story tutorial, and then some uh, local kind of AI computer battles that you can do. And it's a basic demo. It's not like your online beta test that you would see. Although I do wish that they had online, at least during this demo. I I don't think that they're gonna implement that in the future. I think it's strictly just a single player kind of experience for the people who want to get this demo, and that's okay because I think that there's definitely a lot of people who get fighting games for a lot of different reasons, and while the online multiplayer aspect isn't something that's completely coveted by every person who buys and enjoys fighting games, the online is a component that should be good, but it's not always the main function that keeps people playing. And in terms of Street Fighter, one of the bigger things that is probably drawing a lot of people's attention to this game is its story mode, its single player content. And from the trailer that it was put out, it seems that there's going to be a large variety of single player content, from arcade modes to the story kind of hub mode areas, and then we get like into like the crazy custom mini game battles that you could do with. I believe that they have like battles where barrels drop on your characters while they fight, or you have to complete certain challenges in the round before you could win the match, I suppose. But that all does seem really cool. But the story mode stuff seems like it's going to be the biggest draws for this game, especially compared to other fighting games like Street Fighter V, which did have an attempt at story single player content. It had arcade mode, which I think was implemented later on. Wasn't really there at launch, but the story mode was implemented later on as the game progressed, and it was included as like a free or maybe like an update kind of DLC thing. I don't think people had to outright pay for it. Maybe there was a season pass. Um, and I know that as a casual Street Fighter fan, that people were a little burned by the launch of that game and the content that it had. The story mode is definitely like bare bones. Although I would give Street Fighter V's story mode a few legs up than Guilty Gear, because while Guilty Gear's story mode made sense, like in Strive, it has cohesive beginning to end as far as I know. I'm not a big lore buff, so I'm not really gonna get the nitty gritty of that. But I understood the story from start to finish in Guilty Gear Strive, and when I played Street Fighter V, I don't really know what was happening. I know that like the Dreadlock guy was upset for some reason, and M Bison and everybody else were collecting these like chess pieces, and then the world might have ended. And things kind of seemed okay. Um, that's just a broad hand of what I remember, but I don't think I'll ever play the Street Fighter V story mode again. But it does have fights in it, which is something that Guilty Gear Strive doesn't have. It doesn't have like actual combative fights, which is always a disappointment to me. I mentioned that last episode where you don't do a single fight in the story mode of that game. In Street Fighter 5 you do, and that's okay. You know, you don't play as all the characters in the at least the launch roster of the Street Fighter 5 story mode, but it's a good attempt for a story mode that I think came out in when 2014, 2015. But it seems for Street Fighter 6 that they're doubling down on all the content that you could have in this game. It's not just fancy cutscenes and like an elaborate story. I'm sure the story's there somewhere in some fashion, but if you've played the demo, you can definitely see that this game is going to harbinger a lot more on like building up your character that you create, right? Leveling it up, doing side quests, and like unlocking cosmetics or moves for them, and it's unsure how in depth there of the story there is because from just based off of playing the demo, and I'm sure it's probably teased in some of the earlier trailers, but just the demo itself, you get like a partner throughout the story. Like I think it's one of the fighters for the new cast, and you train under Luke, and you do some tutorial stuff, and I think that's probably going to extend to the later parts of the game where you go fight the more prominent Street Fighter characters, probably like Ryu, Ken, Chun-Li, and learn from them. But unsure there's a proper villain in the game. I would hope there would be. I know fighting games have always been one of the more prominent genres for secret bosses and unlockable characters and all that kind of stuff, and that's all really cool to see. So maybe we'll get something like that. It seems like that they're doing a lot of uh, ways to keep the player playing in terms of this game. Like the story mode's expansive enough to warrant your time and effort while still feeling rewarding, right? You're playing the game and earning things, whether that be through probably just story mode stuff. I'm pretty sure in the multiplayer aspect you're gonna earn some kind of currency or unlockable, hopefully, to get some cool stuff. MK12 or MK12 is coming out, but MK11 was a game that really was heavy-handed in its grind for its cosmetic stuff. And while all those things are really cool to have in a game, it's never like the main focus. You know, if the game is good to play and you find people fast enough to warrant continue playing even more matches with people, and it functions, if it's like a functioning fighting game, then that's all that really matters. You know, Street Fighter 6 looks really pretty as terms of quality. I don't think it holds up in terms of something maybe near the more anime style that Strive has, or the more realistic kind of 3D textures that Tekken 6 has been showing off. Not Tekken 6, Tekken 8. The Tekken 8 has been showing off recently. It looks like a much better version of 5. That's what I'll say. Street Fighter 6 looks like a much better version of 5. Just in terms of like the cel shady cartoon style, which has always been fine. I think Street Fighter has always had to have a nice balance between what's a really good artistic style that still looks goofy, like you can play with it. I still remember in a lot of the Street Fighter games, the few that I've played, when enemies get hit, their eyes like bulge out of their skulls, and they do like funny facial animations, which is always nice to see. It's ways of like giving characters like interesting flair, or making the fighting game feel a lot different from everyone else. All the fighting games out there like that have gore or just like standard like grimace kind of face when they get hit. But it looks like Capcom is doing a really good job in terms of promoting this game. I believe it was delayed a full year. It was supposed to come out last year, I think maybe around August, maybe September. But now we're in April, and it's going to come out in June this time. So about a year. And it looks like that was a good idea, a really good idea, which is always nice to see, you know, as heartbreaking and probably like disappointing the news would be about games being delayed or pushed back. It's always for a good reason. You know, obviously there's a thing that would be wrong for a game, and they want to try and fix that or steer it into a direction that's, you know, more palpable to sell. It would be more acceptable to purchase for people, which is nice. I do think that the content overall would be a pretty good package for a fighting game. $60-$70 at launch. I'm sure that's fine now. We're getting a story mode, arcade mode, multiple like arcade modes and battle modes. Launch roster I think is capped to maybe 20 or 24 characters, something around that. We're getting quite a bit. On top of DLC characters that were announced, Aki, Recede, Ed, and Akuma, which is cool. I think they're all returning characters as far as I know. Aki sounds familiar, but I know I've seen Recede, Ed, and Akuma. I'm pretty sure they're probably in Street Fighter 5 as well, those three. But seeing that we got DLC already is pretty good. They have an entire year planned out. You know, I for one maybe would have done a whole like tease thing per character rather than just lump all the announcements into one. Because part of the fun for me for fighting games is, or in terms of fighting game DLC, is like the announcements for who the next character is going to be, and knowing who all four DLC characters are going to be is kind of okay, but it does lose that little mystery of who's going to be next. Smash Bros has always been a game like that where every announcement and reveal was super exciting because that build up was always there, and uh, original characters would be pretty cool for Street Fighter, I think. I know that a lot of the original fighters for Street Fighter 5 are probably not as favored. I think maybe the more recent ones were a little more enjoyed, like Manat or Gil. Those are like the more Season 3 end ones and stuff. But it does really look like Street Fighter is on a good track to really show that it's still one of the greatest games out there in terms of fighting games, and it's going to need to prove that it earns that spot to be at the top again, especially with Tekken 8 and Mortal Kombat 12 allegedly on the horizon. Those games are also like the biggest fighting game franchises out there, and it's been a slow build up. We've had smaller titles come out recently, like Guilty Gear, or I think Project L had a small run for a minute. Dragon Ball Fighters is probably the biggest one outside of Smash to hold up a light for quite a long time. But I'm excited. This is my first Street Fighter game at launch that I'll be playing. I do plan on getting Street Fighter 6 the day it drops, hopefully, and maybe find a character that sticks to me for a while. If not, I'll just do my online character as the character creator, whatever I make, because that always does seem fun. I want to try and put more time into this game than I ever had for a fighting game. Just play it every so often, on and off, and see if I get better or just learn some cool moves and stuff with whatever characters that I'm playing. So I've always found myself buying a lot of fighting games and then only doing like the single player content and most of the arcade runs, and maybe I'll dabble into the online, but usually I just get my butt kicked online. I'm never one to like really strive to get good at certain mechanics of fighting games or combos and all that. I'd rather just hit buttons and have fun and do cool stuff. Strive and Dragon Ball Fighters are probably the two fighting games that I've tried the most to learn, because Dragon Ball is Dragon Ball. I love it. Amazing game. I have nothing but good things to say about the game, even with its bland story mode. But Strive has a character that I think really stuck with me. I really like Ramithal. She has a really fun game plan with her swords, using that to keep your opponent in a certain kind of reach range where you could give him pressure, kind of hold him off if you really need to. I don't know. I've learned Ram for quite a bit, and I've won a lot of matches with her online, and that's been really fun. So I still plan on playing a lot of Strive for now until Street Fighter 6 probably comes around. So until 6 comes around, it's just gonna be Strive. I want to stay on the topic of video games for a bit because a game comes out, I think pretty soon, same day as Jedi Fallen Survivor, and it's Dead Island 2. And me as a big zombie fan and a big fan of Dead Island 1 when it first came out, this is a game that I'd love to get my hands on if it wasn't at the price of $70+. Especially considering what is like the format for this game, how it's not a full open world game, and sure there are more characters to pick as, but I'm not going to play Dead Island 2 6 times, let alone more than maybe once or twice. I really liked the first game. The first game was really fun. Uh, I still remember when the trailer dropped with the girl being a zombie, falling out of the window, and then rewinding it back to the beginning of it to see like the family fighting against the zombies to save her. And I played that game at launch. Um, it was a little buggy at start, which like what game never really has some small bugs at launch? That's always been something that's pretty easy to forgive for me is like bugs or small glitches. If my game's like having some frame rate issues or minimal stuff, I'm pretty okay about that. Larger glitches where like maybe quests are unfinishable or the game's crashing and stuff like that, then that's a little more upsetting. But I'm pretty forgiving on those kind of things. So I had a good experience with Dead Island 1 because I enjoyed roaming around. It felt like a fun time. Sometimes you find cars and other vehicles and schematics for weapons and all kinds of stuff. And it was cool upgrading a character and all that. I'm sure they have that in the sequel as well with like the perk trees and things. I'm sure that's all probably back. But there was something really fun about roaming the open world with your friends online. I played that game with four players almost all the time with my friends back in high school when it came out, and played it maybe 3 or 4 times just in total. And that game has some really cool secrets with like the Jason Voorhees enemy you can find somewhere in the game. And while I would have preferred Dead Island 2 to be a little more like Dying Light, like the Dying Light franchise, just because we had Dying Light 2 already come out, and that seems like a far more better uh, purchase for full price, even though this Dying Light 2 is probably on sale right now compared to Dead Island 2. But I still think maybe Dying Light would be the better game because it offers way more, like in terms of combat and mobility. The nighttime stuff is its own kind of game plan for all its content. And story is one thing. I think story in zombie games has always been middle of the road because they've always tried to be walk a fine line between scary enough to be like realistic or at least like believable, and then sometimes funny. A lot of these games have like a lot of good charm to them that really makes the world feel like it's a little more lighthearted. Dead Island 1 did that a lot. There was some humor and some goofiness to it, which is really enjoyable. Dying Light took itself a little too serious. It's like Dead Rising. Dead Rising is another good game. That's a zombie game and draws that line between wacky, goofy, and just utterly serious. If you've played Dead Rising 2, that's where it goes. Absolutely, that game could be goofy, funny, sad, and I want to get Dead Island 2. I probably will. It seems to have co-op with its 6 characters, so maybe at some point me and my friends will grab Dead Island 2 and blast through it. But I'd like to play the first one again before it goes down, with maybe servers or anytime, maybe a co-op. I don't have it on PC, at least for now, but I wouldn't mind playing it again. It is a bummer that there's no free roam, though. Like, stages and areas are all kind of okay, but for a game that's $70 and the last game had free roam and this one like is a step back, I hope that the zones in this game are pretty enjoyable. The environmental storytelling is one thing, but I'd rather the zones be like interesting to explore first, and then like difficult to fight in, and all that kind of stuff. But it's good to see that this game did come out because it was in development hell for quite a long time. And when games are just like announced to be worked on, but just never sewn off ever again, and just kind of left to just be forgotten, it's always sad. It always is sad, and I've always said like until you see like a proper trailer for anything, it doesn't mean it's real. Movies are one thing with like their trailers, uh, and then, like their announcements, but video games, big cinematic trailers, and even trailers that say that they're in game running, that never means that they're gonna like fully come out or anything. They always make these games to be usually shown off prior to like any proper build is uh presentable to the public. Then again, even any promotional material you see is from builds that are made from a few months ago, and not even the current stuff that the company's working on. But I thought Dead Island 2 was dead in the water when it was announced next to Dying Light because Riptide really burned me. Mentioned last episode, you could probably hear about it. I don't want to rip on Riptide anymore just because you shouldn't make a DLC into a full-blown game. That's just me. But it's good to see that this game is getting back on its feet, and I hope that people do buy it and enjoy it for what it is, and in the future I'll probably try to grab it on a Steam sale or something. I did choose a new book to read after Rogue Squadron, and I chose to go from sci-fi to a different genre that I enjoy, and that's horror. And I've been reading I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. And not to get too deep into the book just yet, but there is a movie which I think is probably a much different take than the book. It's obviously like inspired, but they're very different stories. Um, I Am Legend, the movie featuring um, his name just escaped me. He's John Hancock. Will Smith. He's Will Smith. Will Smith plays a researcher in the movie who's left in like a faux apocalypse, and really great. It was one of the earlier movies I remember seeing, and I always knew that there was a book about it, and I never got a chance to read it. And here we are with me cracking open I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. I've never read a Richard Matheson book before, um, but just by the cover here alone, where it says books like I Am Legend were an inspiration to me by Stephen King, that was enough for me to just open it up. I'm not far into it. I'm only 40 pages in, but it's having a really nice start because you just follow the character Robert Neville from the time the apocalypse already happens. And if anybody who's seen the movie, because this is where the big distinction comes in between the movie and the book, where this isn't a spoiler. It's just a facet that I think makes both adaptations really different. I would say adaptations like makes the original source material different from its movie successor is that while in the movie they're more like rabies kind of inspired zombies, kinda. They have similarities to another fictitious villain or monster that you would see in horror, and that's vampires. And I Legend, the book, details the creatures much more vampire-like than the movie, which is cool in some regards. You know, I'm not going to be nitpicky over here, but I'm not a big vampire fan, none to say. Um, I think vampires are cool to certain degrees, but in this book, it's definitely hard vampires. Like there's the nomenclatures of like the stakes and the garlics being used to propel them and keep them away, which is always fine. You know that always delves into some kind of cool border supernatural horror stuff, which is has been a staple for vampires all the time. You know, and I'm not sure how it ends, so I'm not sure how really in depth or different it goes with terms of vampires, but I think the idea of vampires taking over the world is something that's really interesting because sometimes they're deemed as intelligent. You know, most of them. There's even some of that identity in the book itself, where some of them seem to be kind of smart. But in a lot of times, a lot of the uh, zombie creatures in media just kind of delve into kind of their instincts and just kind of go to survivability and just try to feast blood and stuff. But this book's pretty good so far. Robert Neville seems to be in like a really bad situation compared to maybe the movie. Because in this book, they're actively looking for him. Like, as far as the beginning of the book goes, he's early by himself, and there's every night the vampires like calling his name and trying to get him out of his sanctuary. and it's definitely a much more harrowing story than I Am Legend, which is one about loneliness. If you saw the movie, it's definitely one about loneliness because he kind of gets really crazy by the time he's shown off in the movie. Robert Neville as a character, we see how he's devolved mentally in his sanity in terms of like just not having anyone to talk to or anything. But I Am Legend, the book, uh, Robert Neville isn't a scientist as far as I know. He seems to be just like a regular guy. I don't think he told us what he is yet. Also, this book takes place in like the 70s, which is a big difference to the movie. In the movie, the cause for the illness is a woman, I believe, cures cancer, and upon like the cure for cancer is like turning people into these faux vampire like creatures where the sun still damages them, but they're meta humanly strong with superpowers, and they can only go out at night and stuff like that. I'm not sure what the cause of it in the book was, but they do treat it as kind of like an infection. It seems like there was like maybe like a quarantine or like some kind of response by the government in some way, which is kind of cool. Uh, Something that comes to mind with that is like 30 Days of Night, if you've ever seen that movie. It's also a comic series, actually, uh, where like the places up in the ice caps get really dark for long stretches of time. They don't see the sun during our revolution around it, and that's when like the vampires choose to attack this small like Arctic town and stuff. Really, really good. Probably one of my favorite vampire stories, next to something like Dusk Till Dawn movies. Really good. But I'm excited to finish this book. I'm not sure what I'll read after that. Um, this is a horror book, and maybe I want to read a horror book after that. I always like to kind of keep myself on my own toes when it comes to what I'm going to read next. Because it is kind of cool to always go from sequel to sequel, but it is nice to jump from genre to genre and just have a random pattern rather than like hope for like have a line stack of books where I was like, all right, I'm just gonna read the next one on the list. Here's this one. Here's this one. Sometimes you just feel like you got to read a certain genre or a certain style of book or even an author or something like that. But if you read I Legend, please hit me in the comments. Don't spoil anything, but let me know what kind of horror monsters are your favorite, because vampires certainly aren't my favorite, but they're definitely a monster that offers a lot of diversity, like what you could do with them. They're not like your like aliens you can do a lot with in terms of like intelligence, but vampires have always been like a cool human aspect to them throughout history, which has always been really nice. Now, to start off with, what I want to talk about next is I have a funny story that relates to what would probably be the inspiration to what I want to talk about, and that is, if anybody remembers, around the time when BioWare was announcing Mass Effect Andromeda and Dragon Age's Inquisition, probably around the time of 2012, 2013, they had shown off these live action trailers that were only like 20 or 30 seconds long, where these kids had shown that they were doing extraordinary like things. Like one was this kid had a sinkhole like under his house, and he caused that, or he caused a fire tornado in a parking lot. They were really quick like video teases for like a new original world or game that they wanted to do. And in my mind, when they announced that, I had thought that they were teasing that they were going to make a superhero game, right? Because BioWare is most known for their sci-fi game Mass Effect, their fantasy game Dragon Age, and even their adaptations for the Star Wars Old Republic stuff, which is just more sci-fi. And I had thought that they were going to do superheroes. I thought that was be the best thing in the world. You get to make your own superhero, have superhero companions on your team or villains, maybe even go like a villain route. And my mind was racing back in like uh, middle school or high school, whenever that was probably announced, probably more high school. And at the time, I was dying to see what else would be announced for that. And it was a slow trickle from BioWare. They didn't really announce a lot of stuff about that game for a while until a E3 hit, probably the one right after or a year later. And they had talked about it being a kind of 4v1 team versus master villain kind of game where like the villain would place enemies uh, or obstacles in like generated areas against the four-player heroes that would fight against the villain. And I was so disappointed by them announcing that this game, which was called Shadow Realms, wasn't a superhero game. It didn't look like a BioWare game at all. Actually, it looked like a MOBA kind of team hero game that you would see a little more around like now times like Overwatch or stuff like that. And man, was that a massive disappointment to why I wanted the game to be. I wanted to be a superhero game. I wanted to make a superhero and like an original superhero world developed by BioWare, right? Legendary BioWare. Um, Massive disappointment. So disappointed. And I've always been a massive fan of games like Marvel Ultimate Alliance, where you could play as established heroes, but still feel like you kind of affected the world in some way with some choices, right? If you played Marvel Ultimate Alliance, they have choices where like you can choose between Nightcrawler and Jean Grey dying in like Mephisto's world, or Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2, where you can choose like what side of the Civil War event you want to choose between like Captain America or Iron Man and all those cool heroes. And I love that stuff. I love it. Um, and there's so much you could do with like a superhero world too. So coming off of that, fast forward a few years, I discovered tabletop RPGs, and then I discovered that they have superhero inspired tabletop RPGs. And for a long story short, they haven't released it yet, but Marvel is currently going to release their 3D6 Marvel Multiverses tabletop RPG, which I do plan on getting. I have the playtest booklet on hand. From you could have pre-ordered it a few years ago, and it's like $10 now. You can even get it online probably. Um, I do plan on getting the full game when that comes out. I didn't run that system for my current game. I used instead Mutants Masterminds 3rd Edition. And I use that specifically because when looking at the Marvel game and other games like Masks and stuff, I wanted a game that would allow my players to really create the hero they wanted to create, regardless of it being like for their background or their origin, but more specifically for like their powers, right? For whatever reason, it's fine, but you can have any kind of powers that you want as a superhero. So like, I wanted a system that you could really flesh out and make your own. And when I found Mutants Masterminds, this game has a D20 system where you roll D20 die and a point buy system for its leveling, where like at a certain levels you get certain points, and you put those points into your attributes and your powers and stuff, and then you make a character from there. And that goes into gear and your bases and all this kind of stuff, and your costumes even. And I fell in love with it. I fell in love with this game as soon as I found it. So it was a lot of fun. Published by Green Ronin, which they do a marvelous job with this game itself. Because looking at the books, the Deluxe Hero Handbook and the Deluxe Game Master's Guide, the world itself that they have here has so much lore and just palpability. It feels like a superhero world. It has its own golden age kind of eras and those kind of things, which makes it feel like there's so much you could do for it itself. And I didn't use that specific setting for my Mutants and Masterminds game that I ran for my friends. I did not use the original lore that they have for their system, only because that would have been nice and all, but I wanted to give a more familiarity to the setting, something that I understood a little more because superheroes is so nuanced. There's there's so much depth to the way that a superhero world works, and that just goes from uh, things like your super weakness, right, your kryptonite, to the origin of your powers, right, what is the cause of your powers, to like the friends that you have in the game or in the comics, where like your coworkers, your people who know you're a superhero, your superhero coworkers, they're all affected. Um, it was an expansive world, and I didn't want to uh, just kind of piggyback off of the original lore for here, and I didn't want to make my own. So I stuck my players into a version of the Marvel universe for the game, and for posterity's sake, the basic setting for it was like your basic understanding of a Marvel 616 universe. You know, your regular normal understanding. Like all the superheroes are around, all the villains have been around. Most of the major events has happened, like Infinity War, Civil War, things like that. Just to give like a basic understanding for returning players, to give it like make it feel familiar, like they're in the original 616 world, and then for returning like or new people who were as versed in Marvel, because not all my friends were super Marvel heads, so that they're not just getting blasted with tons of information. Some of it is easy to digest and give to them because the Marvel 616 universe is pretty basic. You know, you have a Spider-Man who's usually like a teenager for the most part. The Avengers lineup is pretty much the same. X-Men's usually pretty much the same sometimes. Um, I just thought it'd be really easy, and I had always wanted to do a Marvel superhero game similar to what I had thought the Shadow Realms game would have been, where you make your own superhero and you roll around in the world of Marvel characters, and that was just the dream, you know. And I did get to live that with my friends every Friday, and I'll probably put that up on screen. The entire issue list. I have a list of the issues, the sessions that we have. They're all titled kind of like a comic book. That was kind of the feel. I really wanted to give all the characters, all the player characters, their own comic book feel. Um, really make it feel like they were in a world that superpowers, while maybe feel like a curse or a blessing, your life is affected by this. That was always like the goal. It was meant to be a lot more of a laid back, easygoing game. You know, we've played a lot of tabletop games in the past where they've been really heavy on story for our DM's sake, or character focus for some like side plots, to even like heavy-handed combats with strenuous like rounds and playthroughs and stuff like that. And I wanted this game to be a little more freeform, where you know if we left off at a good spot for me to set up some new content, then I can at least get like a good battle here and there with some villain, either whether it be from the player characters like background or a Marvel character specifically, to them having like fun side events to like how a normal superhero lives their lives. Like maybe you're late to work, or you're late to school, or you come home and your family's kidnapped, that kind of stuff. And to me, like the superhero lives are so chaotic all the time, and I wanted to make the game feel like session by session the players were doing new and cool things every time. So to uh, get a basic understanding for anybody who wanted to see the difference between what makes this Mutants Masterminds game different from a Marvel setting that you would find anywhere else, is The player characters dubbed themselves the Just Us League. Uh, Name will be spelled probably correctly online on the screen for you, so that I could uh, have you guys see how it's properly spelled, because it is weird. It's a faux play on Justice, Justice League. Um, we had about 33 sessions total, and in that 33 sessions, we had 6 PC characters. 2 of them joined later on throughout the campaign, but the current roster for the Justice League was Umbra, who is a Wakandan embassy worker, who is a vassal for the Egyptian god Kek. This individual has darkness powers. Very cool character. The second member is Velocity, a 14-year-old with powers of super speed. That kid had a lot of tough moments dealing with his social life and hero life. Really cool. That was a great character to see on paper and on screen. The points, trying to make this character, like the game is a little cumbersome at times with its point buy systems and its leveling up and stuff. But a speedster character was definitely a very powerful character as we got to the end of it. The third member is the Gherkin, a man with spider powers from the 1940s who was pickled into the modern age. Fans of Spider-Man Noir and the movie featuring Seth Rogen and American Pickle might find this character very intriguing, because he's probably the fan favorite out of the whole roster. A gem of a pickle. The fourth original member, is the Guardian Devil, a devil who obtained the power of the Iron Fist. First real character with ties to more modern Marvel lore, which is pretty cool. Guardian Devil was a really fun character. For lore's sake, it's canon that the collector has a full copy of all the Karate Kid movies. So there's that little fun piece of information. And 2 new characters join the roster later on. The first one being Hayes, a damage control agent with smoke powers, who has quite the psychedelic trip going on in his mind. That's all I'll say. And last but not least is the Gabagool, who is a monster, a mobster, not a monster, a mobster who has gotten a symbiote, a different kind of alien monster. He gets a symbiote, and it's kind of like a mobster Spider-Man kind of guy. Very cool character. This is the roster of the Just Us League, and these characters melded so well. I think a lot of the game was really propelled by how the players played their characters and the lore that got intertwined with them throughout it. To go off, what will be on the screen probably right now is the issue list for the Just Us League sessions. Like you can see, we had about 33 sessions in total. The first session, point 0.5 in a pickle, was really just session 0, but we ended up getting some gameplay into it by the end. So that was pretty fun. So it counted as like a half session. And then Come Together, issue 1, was their first time meeting each other. That was really cool. Kicking off the Secret Invasion event, which, not to get into the PCs, the player characters get involved with Nicolette Fury. The only one of the changes to my world versus regular Marvel world is Nick Fury is a female, or more older, kind of already wary in her years, and she needs their help to discover why all the superhero world have been turned into robots. Uh, Pretty cool kind of take on the Secret Invasion event that you would see for um, like the Skrull Invasion and the recently coming up uh, Disney show. That was a pretty cool inspiration. Um, Issue 2, A Violent Night, details Velocity's encounter with his first villain. Hominis Nocturni is a vampire centered event with Blade, which is pretty cool. Like a Dragon was the Guardian Devils little session where they fight a villain for him. Um, the two-parter WAP was a really fun time for the character Umbra fighting his villain, and Lunchtime turned into a fun little food fight with some food monsters, if I remember. That was pretty fun. Um, the factory was the culmination, or I would say the real end to the Secret Invasion event. Uh, and then by the end of that, we had a fun mystery involving the X-Men. Um, I don't quite remember what was stretched thin too much on, but Smoke on the Water is when we first introduced the uh, next introduction character or player character, Hayes. And then we get into the Infinity War arc, which was uh, obviously involving the Infinity Stones, which delves into a really fun time involving a character's wedding up into waifu, obviously. Um, Psychonauts is a reference to the video game Psychonauts. If anybody's played that, you might get a hint to what happened in the game. A Pound of Flesh, Holiday Humbug, and Master of Puppets all deal around the Guardian Devil and his backstory for the most part. Also, getting Holiday Humbug is the introduction of. No, I'm wrong, actually. Holiday Humbug was the Christmas party, and World War Hulk was a really fun event for people. Cats and Dogs is the introduction of the Gabagool. That's where the timeline runs. All these happen like week by week, and it's very difficult to remember what happens. But they do end up having a World War Hulk event, which is pretty fun. Cats and Dogs, like I said, introduces the Gabagool, who affects the Devil's Nest and deals with the devil issues, which was more on a Guardian Devil side of his villainy. But the Gabagool comes into play for a really, really wacky reason, which might get detailed at some point later. Coast to Coast was fun. The Justice League meet the West Coast Avengers and fight Super Skrull versions of themselves, which is pretty fun. For Velocity, they go into the future to try and save his family, and they all go into 2099 where they find 2099 versions of themselves. Red Nation culminates in them returning and fighting the Red Skull. Darkest Dreams is a centered piece for Hayes and what's going on with his character. Reunions was a more relaxed session where something I wanted to focus on at the moment was giving characters like their side NPC kind of friends, right? Matt Murdock has like Foggy Nelson. For the same thing, Captain America has like Peggy Carter. Not superheroes per se, but like people that always kind of are in the background helping out. Peter Parker has like a J. Jonah Jameson boss kind of guy. I do want to keep some of these centered around like fun events you do see in superheroes. So between a lot of these events, Velocity as like the 14-year-old, he's late to school. He deals with like love life. Umbro, who's like an office worker, he deals with like office stuff. And then all of the kind of tribulations that you would get with superhero nomenclature, like the origin of your powers and what causes your powers, things like that. Those have always been something that like I think gives a lot of like flavor to narration and storytelling. it really propels the game. And comic books are really good to like take all that from. With reunions, we get into what I would say is the about the end of the Infinity War arc with Take Me for a Ride and What If, which detail a pretty cool crossover to a prominent Marvel crossover, uh, taken from the title name. If you can guess what it is, go into the comments below and maybe you can guess what the crossover is for issue 30. What if players had some weird take on their lives, some weird origin difference and stuff like that. What If has always been a really fun kind of Marvel stature for itself, and other superheroes have obviously gotten that kind of treatment as well. And the last issue, which was really bittersweet to say as a session, because I've been looking forward to doing a superhero game like this for so long, and it is really nice to see that all the players had so much fun with it by the end and everything. And this has a small Easter egg to a Marvel video game that came out sometime back on the PS2 kind of era. If you can guess what video game, maybe you can put that in the comments as well. And yeah, that is the Just Us League, all 33 issues in its totality. Really, really had a great time with this game. It's a world I would love to go back to and play and see what kind of new characters other people play as in this world, or where the other members of the Justice League end up for what would be Volume 2. I do hope to run that again, absolutely. Had a great time playing Mutants Masterminds. Yeah, coming off of superhero tabletop games, I'm really just waiting on the Walking Dead universe to come out. Really digging that. That's something that I'm checking my email for every day to get the PDFs because I want it. That's definitely the world that I'm most interested in doing in the future. But for now, I've been looking over the Star Wars Age of Rebellion tabletop books, so I might do a Rebellion-style campaign that might be featured on the show at some point in some kind of fashion. They did announce that the Blasphemous 2 trailer came out, and that game looks a lot like the Hades 2 trailer, which doesn't look different from each other. So I think besides like moves, enemies, areas, obviously all that stuff, there won't be that much different. Maybe might be some really cool, interesting gameplay changes. Blasphemous 1 was really fun, but other than that, Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom, and Jedi Fallen Order are probably the only 2 games I'll be getting in the near future. You know, I would like to get that out in 2, but that's just a game that's not really going to be on my radar for now. In terms of books, after I Am Legend, I might go and read Wedge's Gambit, the sequel to the X-Wing book, because I want to see what happened with the characters in that, and I think that, you know, Star Wars is something that every book I've read for a Star Wars series, they're always different. They never really do the same thing all the time. Or maybe a different Star Wars book I might read. I'm not really sure. I think this podcast episode will be a little shorter than the other ones, just because, you know, I wish I could talk about Dead Island 2, but I just didn't get it. I think I want to try and watch the D&D movie, you know, maybe tell you guys how I think about that. But it did come down to either seeing the Mario movie or the D&D movie, and I'd rather spend $13 on tickets on the Mario movie rather than on the D&D movie. But I'm sure the D&D movie is also fine. I've only heard good things. Still excited to see that as well. D&D was one of the first tabletop games I ever even played, so it's obviously a fun time to like go back and like see what kind of things they do with the story or like the ideas of a tabletop game in that world. If they have like one dice reference, I'm sure that's okay. You know, they might have one dice reference. But yeah, this might be one of the really shortest episodes that we have. Everyone, thank you for listening in. I don't know who really does listen in a lot much. You know, you guys don't really comment too much on these. I just kind of put them out after recording. I hope the editing works out for the most part. It's just on my phone for what I can do. So from what I think of, it all sounds pretty good on my end. So you guys haven't said anything really that awful in the last few weeks. I know that we had issues with the music being loud and other stuff, but I'm just kind of doing this, to get my voice out there, see what you guys think about what I think about things, and maybe you guys want to give out a try to I Am Legend or Mutants Masterminds or whatever game or book is really your fancy. You know, I just really want to see where this goes week by week. This has been episode 7 of the Gamer Librarian podcast. Be sure to subscribe for updates on future episode releases. Leave a like and comment on what books or games I should talk about in the future. Thank you, and see you next time.